Hello viewers. In this episode, we are basically going to discuss how radio waves were used to start broadcasting. The concept of broadcasting was not there till the discovery of radio waves, and it gradually started after the radio waves were used for telegraphic purposes. Now, what is broadcasting? If I ask you the question, what is broadcasting? The answer would be that broadcasting is when a message is given out from one particular center and it is received simultaneously by hundreds or maybe thousands of receivers located at geographically different locations. Okay, that is essentially what broadcasting is. That message is given out from one particular point, from one center, but simultaneously received at different points by different receivers who do not know each other, who are not congregated at one place, who are scattered over a large geographical area. So that was possible only through the use of radio waves. Now, in the previous episode, we saw how the first voice message was transmitted in the year 1906 by Reginald Fessenden, and that led to a lot of interest in America among those people who like to tinker with technology and try out new things in their homes. They all built such technically minded people made their own radio transmitter sets at home, because it's not very difficult to make a radio transmitter set. If you get the components in the market, you can assemble, you can do a little bit of soldering, assemble the circuit, and you can make your reasonably powerful radio transmitter set, with the help of which you can send out voice messages. And if your neighbors have similar transmitter as well as receiver sets, they can listen to your voice messages and they can reply back. Okay. So therefore, these people on their own initiative, they started having a network where they made these radio transmitter receiver sets. They put up antennas on the terraces of their homes, and they were happy entertaining each other, telling each other stories, gossiping, maybe singing to each other, reading out poems and so on and so forth. Okay. So it's something like Facebook. It's a very primitive kind of Facebook, but nothing on screen, nothing in writing, but everything in the air. But then one person, David Sarnoff, he saw the commercial possibility of this endeavor. He was also an American, and he thought that these people, they are just entertaining each other with homemade radio sets. Instead, why not start a company that will nicely manufacture good radio receiver sets and also transmitter sets, very powerful transmitter sets. And he told himself that if supposing a company is formed that gets the best of people, best singers, best orators to the station to speak, entertain to the public or to sing to the public and so on, and then if people buy these radio sets, they can easily tune in and listen to these programs and entertain themselves. So he saw the commercial possibility of the whole thing, and in the year 1920, in Pittsburgh, the first commercial radio station started. It was called KDKA. So here you see a picture of this KDKA office, which is a very small, ordinary room, unassuming office with a microphone or maybe a couple of microphones and a transmitter set, everything in one room. Okay, so obviously investment into starting an office like this is not very high, and that is easy to imagine. And some companies had started manufacturing radio receiving sets and marketing radio receiving sets. So whatever was broadcast by KDKA could easily be received by these receiver sets, and people could tune in and listen to, enjoy the programs broadcast by KDKA. By the end of 1921, there were 8 commercial radio stations. They followed the footsteps of KDKA, and they earned a revenue. There were 2 ways of earning the revenue: a profit from the sale of radio sets, a certain portion of the profit came to these companies, and also advertisements. What kind of advertisements? Supposing somebody is having that winter ball at the community center in that locality. So that would be announced, and a certain amount of money would be paid to the radio station in order to announce the ball. okay, that this as winter ball will be there. Or maybe a new garments outlet has opened and they would advertise through the radio that this is the address of the new garments outlet, come here to see this sort of array of garments you can buy from here, and so on. Similarly, a new food joint. So people found it very easy and very affordable to advertise their new services or new shops or new products through the radio. And the radio company also started earning quite a bit. And why would the radio manufacturers share a part of their profit with these broadcasting companies? Because if these broadcasting companies do not exist, then nobody would buy the radio set. So therefore, the manufacturers in their own interest would want the quality of broadcasting to be better and the broadcasting company to have solid, based on, founded on solid financial backing, so that there will be more sale of the radio sets. Okay, so it was a symbiotic relationship between the manufacturers and the broadcasters. So therefore, a certain percentage of the sale of radio sets always came to the broadcasters. And that's how the broadcasters started making money. And by the year 1922, there were 564 broadcasting stations in America. Okay, so like an infectious disease, it had caught on and everybody was starting his own broadcasting system. Okay. So what happened to David Sarnoff, who the original visionary, who had seen the commercial possibility of radio? He told himself that he should be one step ahead of the others. And he said, okay, so I will provide to my listeners what the other broadcasters cannot do. And what is that? I will give them a live running commentary of a football match or a soccer match happening in New York, and people in Chicago will be able to listen to that live running commentary. And he actually actualized his dream by making a negotiation with the Bell Telephone Company. Because by then telephone had also been invented and Alexander Graham Bell had set up his company. So he negotiated with the Bell Telephone Company to use the telephone lines to transmit the voice the long distance from New York to Chicago, and then finally broadcast it through this radio broadcasting sets. And so the listeners sitting in Chicago will listen to the live commentary of a soccer match happening in New York. So that was a new experience for everybody. It was a breakthrough in terms of reaching out to these people at longer distances, appropriate use of technology, and further opening out the commercial possibilities of broadcast. And that is how the first National Broadcasting Corporation was started, and obviously David Sarnoff was the head of the first National Broadcasting Corporation of America, which is NBC. Okay, because they thought that entire country could be networked through this broadcasting process. And the sports commentators were much in demand, because any kind of sport, whether it is baseball or soccer, people wanted to listen to running commentary instead of going to the field. And of course, other performers, musicians, and those who could, crack jokes and storytellers, these people with good voices, good diction, smooth talkers, they were in much demand, and this sort of profession opened up. Now, some of the programs were sponsored. That means programs with very strong commercial value, they were sponsored, they were backed by commercial organizations. And whereas some other programs which were more of educational value, those were public service programs like news, weather report, or any kind of educational program, reading from the Bible, those were public service programs, whereas out and out entertainment programs were sponsored by commercial organizations. So that's how the radio industry took off in America, and it flourished. But it was a chaotic, unplanned, unregulated growth. Okay. Why chaotic, unplanned and unregulated? Because the radio waves that were used as carrier waves to carry the voices, there was no regulation on that. So suppose here there is a broadcasting station that is using a radio wave of a certain kilohertz frequency, let us say. And here, just a few miles away, there is another radio broadcasting station that is using radio waves of a very similar frequency, nearby frequency. And I am a listener here. I have brought my own radio receiving set and I am tuning in, I am listening to the program. Now, since the frequencies of the carrier waves of these two radio stations, they are so close to each other, so when I am tuning in, I am getting both. So first of all, I do not know which radio station I am listening to. Secondly, sometimes it may happen that I am getting both and there is an interference and I can't get any one clearly. Okay, because there was no regulation on the use of the carrier waves. All right. So that was one thing. Second thing that was happening is, this was of course David Sarnoff, who was a very good businessman also, that he told the manufacturers that manufacture radio sets that can tune in only certain frequency, that is the frequency of the National Broadcasting Corporation, so that the other frequencies will not be received by the radio sets at all. Okay. So this is unethical. Coming to think of it, this is also unethical. So these, and then of course there was no control on the type of programming. You know, there could be very racist messages that were being broadcast, that were going out in the air, or there could be very indecent stories or programs that were going out on air, and there was no regulatory body to look into the quality of the programming as what was actually being broadcast. All right. So seeing these problems, in the year 1927, the US government decided to start this Federal Communications Commission, which is existent even today. It's called the FCC, to look into the matter and to regulate the growth of broadcasting. So the three main missions of FCC were as follows: prevention of monopoly situation, okay, so that everybody had an equal chance to flourish. If the radio receiving sets could get only one or two frequencies, then so many other radio stations, their programs would not be heard at all. So FCC saw to it that the manufacturers had this wide range of frequencies so that all stations could be received by the radio sets. No monopoly business. Second, frequency allocation. Whenever one wanted to start a radio station, one had to approach the FCC. FCC first of all verify whether the company was technically sound to run a radio station, and then allocate a certain frequency to them, that you only broadcast using these frequencies as your carrier waves. So frequency allocation would happen, so that there was no cross interference between radio stations, and of course monitoring the quality of the programs so that nothing indecent or obscene or racist etc. would go out on air. So these still remain the three main important tasks of the Federal Communications Commission even till this date. All right. Now soon there were other companies that followed the example of NBC, and they also started doing this national broadcast using telephone lines or using relays of the radio waves by whatever way. So these four major national networks were formed in America: NBC, CBS, MBS and ABC. Okay, National Broadcasting Corporation, Columbia Broadcasting Service, American Broadcasting Corporation. So these were the main national networks that were formed, but in addition to that, the local radio stations also continued to exist, which were university radio stations or just community radio stations. Those also continued to exist. So growth became more regulated, but it was a totally, growth of radio in America was totally an individual endeavor, a private enterprise, and it was a commercial growth where money came in from advertisements and sharing of the certain profit from the sale of the radio sets. Okay, there was no government grant given for the growth of radio. Now in England, in the United Kingdom rather, the radio communication remained a point-to-point communication for many years, even though the first voice transmission was made in the year 1919 from Chelmsford in Essex. And these were two 30-minute broadcasts of news and music every day. So half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening. From this Chelmsford, there would be this voice broadcast, and the people with radio sets would be able to listen to these broadcasts. But soon these broadcasts were banned. It was stopped because it was perceived that these were interfering with military radio communication. Now at this point we must remember that both the wars, the First and the Second World War, were fought on the soil of Europe mainly, Asia to a large extent, but not on America. Okay, they were not fought on American soil. So Europe was actually in the thick of the war, both during the First World War as well as the Second World War. All right. So that's why it was a warlike environment, and this 1919 to 1920, that was just when the First World War has ended, but still it was not, peacetime. One can't say that it was truce, but not a peacetime situation. So that is why there was a lot of anxiety that if people have radio sets, and the military people are always using radio for their own communication, if the civilians somehow tune into the military messages, then the secrecy will be lost. So all these anxieties were there, and that's why these Chelmsford broadcasts were banned. But by then, by 1921, actually there were 4,000 receiver sets in the whole of England, which is not a big number, but there were 115 amateur licenses. That means amateurs who could do their own little broadcasting, and 3,000 radio enthusiasts who had formed societies or groups, and there were 63 such societies. So they started giving pressure on the GPO, rather, which is their Information and Broadcasting Ministry, to resume the radio broadcasts for the public, because they wanted to listen to radio. All right. So the Marconi companies once again started there. Initially they were doing only radio telegraphy for the ships, but now they started doing their own broadcast, but only 15 minutes in a week. Just imagine, just a 15-minute broadcast in a week, which was actually nothing. So because of the warlike situation, growth of radio in England was regulated. It was a very, let us say, not a very free kind of situation where free growth of radio could happen. Okay, so it was an emergency situation, military kind of situation. All right. Then on October 18, 1922, the British Broadcasting Company Limited was formed. And who were the shareholders of this company limited? Only the bona fide manufacturers of radio sets. And they opened their own broadcasting station, British Broadcasting Company Limited, whose revenue was earned through half of 10 shilling license fee, because everybody who had a radio set had to pay a license fee at the post office. So half of 10 shillings license fee and 10% royalty on the sale of radio set. So that is how the British Broadcasting Company Limited was formed, but this source of revenue was not enough, and so the company was liquidated, and then government had to intervene, and in 1926 the status of the company was changed to corporation, British Broadcasting Corporation. So this British Broadcasting Corporation was funded by the government, at least partly, but it retained its autonomy. It did not become a department of the government. Okay, so it was no longer an independent commercial company, but at the same time it was not a government department. So it retained its autonomy, and there was a board of governors that were appointed for the running of the corporation. And John Reith was the first Director General of BBC, which is British Broadcasting Corporation. And John Reith is widely acknowledged as the father of public service broadcasting. If David Sarnoff was the father of broadcasting, then John Reith was the father of public service broadcasting, because under his leadership, all the guidelines of public service broadcasting were formulated through a process of trial and error. And the guiding mission of BBC became to inform, to educate and to entertain. In fact, which is the guiding mission for any broadcaster even today. Alright. So therefore, broadcasting should contain programs to give basic information to the people, to educate them, to open their horizon, but at the same time to entertain them. That's how the programs were also conceived and devised. Interestingly, newspapers did not allow BBC to broadcast news till 7 p.m. The newspapers were panicky that if the BBC started broadcasting news, 7 a.m. news broadcast, then people would only listen to the radio broadcast of the news, nobody would buy the newspaper. So the newspaper people said that we will sell our newspaper, people will get the news throughout the day, then in the evening you do an evening news broadcast. So for many years the news broadcast happened only in the evening to safeguard the interest of the newspapers. So that's an interesting bit of information. And Then this public service broadcasting. So what was actually this public service broadcasting? Basically broadcasting with with public money in the interest of the public, making sure that all the sections of the society benefited from the broadcasting, and if the broadcasting reached out to each and every individual in the society as far as possible. All right, because as you see here, since there was no commercial interest here, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, didn't have to show profit at the end of the day. The salaries of the people were taken care of by the government. So the day-to-day running, the expenses for the day-to-day running of BBC came from the license fee paid by all the individuals, the citizens, and also a certain 10% of the sale of the radio set. So in that sense, everybody was an owner of BBC. BBC was not owned by a small group of elite, but everybody was the owner of BBC, because through this little contribution, the everyday running expenditure of BBC came. So if everybody is the owner of BBC, everybody should have a say in the programming of BBC, and everybody should benefit from it. Okay, not only the entertainment programs which would fetch commercial revenue, but all kinds of program. So there was experimentation in different kinds of radio programming, quiz programs and radio documentaries and interviews and so many other things. And through the process of trial and error, what the public wanted, what was good for the public, these things were slowly developed. Now John Reith wrote, he was a visionary once again, and see, he wrote here, rightly developed and controlled, broadcasting will become a world influence with immense potential for good, equally for harm, if its function is wrongly or loosely conceived. It must not be used for entertainment purposes alone. He who provides himself on giving the public what he thinks the public want is often creating a fictitious demand for lower standards which he will then satisfy. Okay, so John Reith is trying to say, don't go by saying this is what the public wants, so I am giving this. Don't say that. Public often doesn't know what it wants. It's latent. The need is latent. The public doesn't consciously know what they want. So give him the best. Give him the best of programming, and then he will let him choose from that. And broadcasting, he envisioned that broadcasting is a very powerful tool. If it is well used, it can be used to the hilt for the development of a nation, for keeping a nation together, and if it is misused, then it can play havoc. All right. So today also we are somewhere in between. To some extent we are using the virtues of broadcasting, utilizing it properly, and to some extent, since everything is so commercialized even in India today, we are succumbing to the market demands and perhaps not coming out with the best of programs. We are not experimenting with the kind of programming that we should otherwise do. So this is the situation. So therefore, in America, commercial broadcasting developed, whereas in Britain, public service broadcasting developed. In India, developed a third model of broadcasting, which was entirely government funded. In India, All India Radio, or Akashvani, till the other day was under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and completely under the government. There were definitely commercial programs that were happening. People were advertising on radio as well as television, but till this PrasarBharati was formed about 10 years, so a little more than 10 years back, the entire broadcasting setup was a department of the government. So in India, it's actually a third model that developed. But I must say one thing, that after India's independence, All India Radio had a spectacular growth, and All India Radio's home service comprises of 326 stations today, located across the country, covering the length and breadth of the country, nearly 92% of the country's area and 99.2% of the total population. AIR originates programming in 24 languages and 146 dialects. So without the support of the government, just by depending on the commercial revenues, reaching out to such a wide public and wide and diverse public would not have been possible. It is possible only because the government's backing is there, and the government has the will to reach out to every nook and cranny of the country through its broadcasting, particularly on All India Radio. So, with those words, that brings us to an end of this third episode of the growth of broadcasting and the development of electronic media. After the invention of television, all the radio organizations, all the broadcasting organizations switched over to radio. Like Doordarshan, from All India Radio we had Doordarshan. Similarly, BBC Radio, from BBC Radio we have BBC Television. So, all the radio broadcasters switched over or diversified into television after the invention of the television, but the mode of broadcasting and the patterns of broadcasting remains the same even in television. So, thank you very much.